On behalf of the Center for Asia Pacific Strategy, my name is Dr. Kuan Colins, and I'll be presenting to you today on digital transformation, accelerating the infusion of emerging technologies to enhance ground and space capabilities. I look forward to the discussion with you. Government agencies have been facing a lot of changes, right? Between the global pandemic, economic disruption, civil unrest, and the tsunami of new technologies. There's like daily something is changing. And with all of this, there is this higher expectation from citizens, from customers, from the stakeholders in the ecosystem to deliver digital services at the same speed and user experience that they see in the private sector. So in their homes, they have things like chatbots and smart TVs and smart refrigerators. And the expectation is that same level of technology exists within their workplace as well. Agencies have no choice but to figure out this problem of how to accelerate and streamline their delivery of digital applications and systems to get them into the hands of their stakeholders as fast as possible. And with that pace of change, that demands velocity and security to meet the agency's requirements. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the innovation ecosystem stakeholder model. Over time, the stakeholder model has evolved. In the beginning, we had what they called the triple helix between engaging with academia in the universities, with government agencies, and with large businesses like SAIC. What's evolved over time is this engagement now with startups, with non-traditional small businesses, and with startup accelerators or venture capitalists. And the reason for this is because of what we were just discussing in terms of this need for accelerated pace of change. And with these smaller organizations like startups and startup accelerators, there is already that culture of failing fast, right? Trying new technologies, experimenting with them, getting that quick feedback and pivoting when they need to. Closing the loop is very important in terms of the implementation of that technology and being able to scale beyond beyond the pilot, beyond the experiment. And so that's why the engagement between startups, larger businesses, government agencies, and academia is important, because now you have that ability to scale. And then being outcome focused, which is why having government agencies involved is so critical, because now we are hyper focused on not just the development of the technology for the sake of the technology, but what problem is it trying to solve? So all of the technologies that we talk about in the space and ground domain area, it's important to still understand what problem within that domain are we trying to solve with the technology, so we don't waste investment dollars on the development of the technology that doesn't really apply to the problem that we're trying to solve. I mentioned that I direct something called the Innovation Factory within SAIC. So this goes along with that building of that innovation stakeholder ecosystem that I was just talking about. The idea is that within your organization, it's important to think through the kind of culture and structure that is required in order to have all of these emerging technologies thrive. So that goes with user outreach and support. So making sure that you are focused on the experience that your customers and stakeholders are having with the technologies that you are delivering. Ideation and collaboration. So this is creating hubs where people can physically gather to share ideas. And it doesn't need to be so formal in terms of, I'm just engaging with you because we are under contract to build the next rocket or to build the next satellite, that this is just about gathering to share ideas so that we can learn and that we can create that culture of creativity, collaboration, and innovation. Training is very important, because as all of these technologies come online, not everybody is going to be up to speed on all of the latest software applications or cloud implementations. So having a robust training model where we can upskill the workforce in things like cloud and AI and machine learning, and having tools so that they can not necessarily have to be the domain expert in every area, but that are they're able to learn intuitively through these tools. So sometimes they call it low code, no code kind of applications, where your workforce can easily get online and learn the technology, apply the technology without a lot of robust training. And then relentless innovation is all about having the space to continuously figure out what the next thing is. This whole idea with innovation and how we accelerate it within government agencies, we have to be in a mode where we are constantly thinking about what's next, that we constantly think that there's something that we could improve upon, and have an environment that is allowing that kind of thinking and that kind of development to thrive. We need to encourage everyone in our workforce to be part of that culture. And so the underpinning of all of this, obviously, is your organization, your alliances with other organizations and partners, vendor partners, and then certainly with the academic partners, because this is where a lot of the R&D, the research and development, the thought leadership is coming from. As we think about the digital transformation service delivery framework, we have 5 pillars that I like to focus on. The ideas here are around cloud adoption, so making sure that we sort of analyze the current state, we give a path forward to how we're going to bring these applications into the cloud and plan for that migration. Customer experience is very critical in terms of helping to improve the delivery of those services, the customer interaction with those services, and understanding where the customer have needs and how we create technologies that help to address those needs. Security obviously is paramount in terms of making sure that whatever we introduce into the environment does not breach our security, and in fact enhances the security. We always want things to make our systems and our enterprises more secure. Analytics is very important. So creating an environment where we can be more efficient and use our data more intelligently to do analysis, reporting, and basically to be a data-driven decision-making organization. With that, we can then apply things like AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning and automation for augmentation as well as prediction of the decisions that we want to make. And then finally, infrastructure optimization. So obviously, assessing the environment, assessing the infrastructure, and making sure that we've modernized wherever possible our networking, our cabling, our just facilities to ensure that it can effectively house all of these emerging technologies and make them run efficiently. At the base of all of this, in order to make these technologies work, we need methodologies that will help the organization to transform as well. So methodologies such as ITIL version 4, which incorporates Agile software development as well as Agile program management and DevSecOps. So we'll talk a little bit more about DevSecOps. Model-based systems engineering. So this is similar to what we call digital engineering, where we are not just designing in that traditional way and then going to testing and delivery and production, but it's modeling and creating virtual hardware, right? And so this goes hand in hand with now developing your software in an Agile and DevSecOps manner, where we can do a lot of that integration testing in an automated and continuous fashion, so that once we get to a production environment, we have a very robust system, right? We're not finding out about security issues in production, that we've addressed all of those very early in the program. I've already mentioned Agile, so scaled Agile framework is critical. Lean Agile portfolio development and management is also very important. And then as an umbrella to all of this is the idea of integrating your development, your security, and your operations in a DevSecOps environment. And DevSecOps is more than just a set of tools, right? It is your culture. So it goes hand in hand with what we talked about in terms of that innovative culture. And there's a lot of convergence around this idea that these technologies will not work if we do not address the culture in which it needs to thrive. DevSecOps is important because, as we mentioned, security is vital in terms of establishing these technologies in the organization. And so now this is the integration of not only development and operations, but your development security and your operations working together and automating as much as possible within that workflow. So the values within a DevSecOps environment, we've mentioned culture many, many times, right? So culture is critical. We need to have a mindset of risk tolerance, knowledge sharing, and that is what enables everything else that follows. Automation is very important, right? So this is how we get faster, is we have continuous delivery pipelines. And without that automation, we can't be efficient and effective and get that velocity that we want. It relies on automation to provide, again, that speed, consistency, repeatable process, and the creation of that environment. Lean flow is very important. So this is like an agile methodology concept where we're working in smaller batches. So the problem with these complex systems that we work on, especially in the ground and space environment, is that they're so complex. And if we don't break them down, we don't see where the problems are as quickly as possible, right? And that's how we get faster, is if we can find the errors, we find the mistakes as quickly as possible, and all the issues in terms of security and the requirements, we shift that left as much as possible. And working in smaller batches helps us to do that. We can manage work and process limits. And the idea there is that we get to a completion point faster than had we just worked in a larger batch size. Measurement is very important also. We need to ensure that we are collecting the data to show that we are actually moving faster than had we been working in a more traditional waterfall environment. And then finally, sharing, right? When we talk about this culture that we want to shift, this environment of trust, sharing is very important to ensure that we know when we have these issues as quickly as possible. So the benefit to our ground and space domain is more transparency, increased productivity and efficiency, and better insight to the flow of work, which leads to better collaboration and this culture of innovation that we want to create. So we've mentioned Agile as a methodology. This is the Agile Manifesto. So whenever the Agile method came out, this manifesto came in terms of what is more valued within this environment. And so the idea here is that we value individuals and interactions more than processes and tools. That doesn't mean that processes and tools aren't important. It just means that the focus in the beginning is more on the relationships with the people that are involved versus the process and tools. We want working software. So we want whatever we're working on, whether it's software or our integrated hardware and software, to be functional all the time, which is more important than comprehensive documentation. So the idea here is not that we're not going to document things, but that we want more functionality in what we are building versus the idea that we have the perfect requirements document. We want to focus on customer collaboration versus contract negotiations. Again, contracts are important, but we want more of that engagement and feedback with our customer so that we can improve upon the product that we're delivering. And then finally, responding to change versus following a plan. We want to have an environment where we can quickly change and pivot versus being so focused on the fact that we had this plan and now it's deviated from the plan. So from a very, traditional perspective, right, the old way, it was about software engineering or just engineering versus operations, right? And they were two separate organizations. And there was a handoff between one organization to the other in terms of working those requirements, the design, coding, unit tests, and then handing it over to operations for integration, infrastructure deployment, help desk, et cetera. So what we want in a new way is an integration of these two organizations where we almost have a mixing of the skills and a shared ownership of the responsibility to ensure that all of the work from requirements to design to test is flowing into integration, deployment, and the continuous improvement and the helping out of our customers once they receive that product. I mentioned, so we're creating this innovation environment, we're applying agile and model-based systems engineering. We want to think about how we create environments where we can rapidly prototype and pivot early, because we don't want to make investments in all of these emerging technologies and then realize, like after years of investment, right, that we now need to pivot to something else. So we want to be able to pilot things and make decisions quickly, so that we are saving, our investment as much as possible. So this is a methodology that incorporates, Agile, DevSecOps, model-based systems engineering in order to do that rapid prototyping. I've got a list of what the inputs could be, right, in terms of data sets, standards, policies, user stories. Within the execution piece, we develop our product roadmap, our documentation. We create those analysis of alternatives so we know what the options are. We have good, robust knowledge management so that we can share what we're learning in the process. And then finally, when we release the pilot, right, or the prototype, we can update now our roadmap. We can take that feedback from the customer and say, here's how we can make improvements, or we can pivot completely and say that we need to move to a different technology set. So the guiding principles for all of this activity is transparency, automation, as we've mentioned with DevSecOps, flexibility with the architecture as much as possible, governance so that we can manage security, compliance, and risk management, and then of course security with auditing and access control. So more along the lines of how do we prepare the workforce now to adopt these technologies and to be ready for what's coming. In the literature, we talk about this idea of the willingness to innovate versus the ability to innovate. And so most people in an organization, it's easy to think about innovation as being sort of, a necessary part of the organization. In order to establish this willingness to innovate, we need to be clear on our purpose, why we exist, have shared values, and talk about rules of engagement. So how are we going to interact with each other? And that creates that sense of community, right? That we are in this together and that we create this culture of collaboration and learning. Then there's the action part of this and the ability to innovate. And in this space, we need to create abrasion. And this is interesting because we want to generate these ideas through discussion, and not everybody is always going to be in agreement in that case. But we do need to be able to create resolution. So people need to not only be able to disagree, but now converge on a solution and move forward together on that. And then agility. So in agility, it's similar to what we've talked about in terms of Agile and that methodology, the ability to test and experiment through quick pursuit, reflection, and adjustment. So we need both, right? We need this environment where we're all willing to innovate, and we need the skills to be able to actually execute and innovate. So disruption is a form of creating this environment, and this idea of disruptive thinking is important to create an environment and a workforce that's ready to adopt these technologies. So here's some tactics to encourage that disruptive thinking. Assume that you're incorrect. Be open to new ideas. Encourage dissent. We talked about that abrasion and this idea that innovation and creative thinking comes from that discussion and discourse and debate. Designate somebody to be the devil's advocate. And what that means is that we're going to designate someone to sort of ensure that we're not group thinking, right? That we're not all having the same idea. Discuss competing alternatives to our decisions, embrace diversity because diversity breeds this new ideas, actively hunt for trends, right? We know in the environment that there are new trends coming along every day. So actively search, seek those out and see if they apply to what you're trying to do. Host idea competitions. This is another, method where you can reach out to the community, reach out to that innovation stakeholder ecosystem, and have everybody in the community engaged in figuring out what the right problem is. and invite junior hires and outsiders into those workshops that we talked about, so that we can stimulate that discussion around what the problem is and what the new technologies are that could potentially help to solve those problems. So some final thoughts. Innovation is not easy to do, and it doesn't magically happen. It does require a tolerance for failure, which means that we plan for that failure, right? So this goes back to that failing fast, right? Engaging with organizations that are used to pivoting quickly around a problem. This is not the same as tolerance for incompetence, though, right? We need a highly skilled workforce, but we need them to allow them to experiment and potentially fail in that experiment, but learn from it. So that's the second point, the willingness to experiment, but be highly disciplined in that. So all of this to say, like when we think about things like Agile and DevSecOps, all of this implies even more rigor, I think, than a traditional methodology. Because even though we're going fast, we're breaking down the work, and we're more collaborative, we still want that discipline within operations to make sure that nothing breaks in production. We want to be psychologically safe, but we want to be completely honest about our feedback around the product that we're building, the environment that we're creating. So this is an interesting point, that we want everyone to feel safe to provide their opinions, but we also want everybody to be able to receive that feedback. Collaboration, but with individual accountability. So in this environment of collaboration, it's easy to lose sort of your own individual accountability. So even though we have DevSecOps all working together, we still need the engineers focused on what they have to deliver from a dev perspective, and the security folks to be focused on what they need to deliver, as well as our operations folks. So we're collaborating, but we're still very focused on our own delivery. And then flat but strong leadership. So we don't want over bureaucratic organizations, but we want very strong leadership to make sure that we are getting the work done. So this ability to change that we just talked about is the most important trait for getting to this accelerated pace of bringing these emerging technologies to our organization. And just be ready to, I guess, encourage these new ideas, right? Promote them, create environments where this change is not uncomfortable, right? It just becomes part of the normal way of doing business in your organizations. I really appreciate the time to speak with you today. It's been an honor to be part of this symposium, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you very much.